continue to work with partners and allies around the world on ways to ensure that China knows that its actions in Hong Kong are deeply troubling, are of real concern for the sake of people in Hong Kong, but elsewhere around the world as well. We will continue to speak up strongly and be there for people who are worried about their futures in Hong Kong.
Speak up strongly, but what else can the world do? There was an act of defiance in Hong Kong as demonstrators flooded the city's streets to commemorate the 31st anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. That defied a government order from Beijing that canceled the vigil for the first time in 31 years. Remember, Hong Kong is the only place in China where a public memorial is allowed. Now, with new national security laws that threaten Hong Kong's autonomy. Remember, back in 1997, the Brits handed it over. It was supposed to be one country, two systems. But now the freedoms that region has enjoyed since then are under deep threat. Is the safety of the estimated 300,000 Canadians living in Hong Kong assured? Let's get a sense of the situation with the former Justice Minister and the human rights advocate who's represented many Chinese dissidents, Irwin Cotler. He is in Montreal, sir. Hope you and your family are doing well. First of all, what do you make and what should the world understand about China canceling the Tiananmen Square Memorial and the usual protests that happened in Hong Kong?
Well, it's just yet another manifestation of the intensification of repression. This is the first time they've actually canceled it for Hong Kong, but it comes at the same time as the Chinese parliament has bypassed the Hong Kong legislature to impose national security legislation in Hong Kong, which will be a breach of the UK-China declaration, which has the status of an international treaty. It also criminalizes fundamental freedoms protected under the basic law of Hong Kong. And it comes in the aftermath of the arrest and bringing to trial of the 15 major leaders of the democracy movement in Hong Kong. So this is an attempt not only to criminalize fundamental freedoms, which would be bad enough, or to impose national security legislation in a repressive manner, which would be bad enough, and to quash the democracy movement itself.
Yeah, but we just lost your audio for a minute, but stay with us, Mr. Cotler. Thousands still took part in the vigil, which was interesting. Maybe it's a sign that Hong Kong residents are going to continue. Do you expect the protests to continue in the wake of the crackdown?
Well, you know, the people of Hong Kong have been engaged in protests now for a year. They've shown their courage in that regard. The repression is an attempt to try, as I say, to quell not only demonstrations, but to quell the democracy movement, if not the democracy itself in Hong Kong. So what's at stake, really, at this point, is the whole rules-based international order as it finds expression in Hong Kong.
Tell me about what the international community, you just heard Justin Trudeau saying we've issued strong statements. You've got lawmakers in the UK, Australia, New Zealand calling for the UN to create a new special envoy to Hong Kong. But it seems to me that the Chinese are saying, do what you want. No one's going to defy us. It almost reminds me, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, if China's calling the world bluff the way, I don't know, Russia called the world's bluff on Crimea. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, you know, they feel that if they can just have to deal with one country alone, and with the United States at this point mired in its own difficulties, they can go ahead and without any accountability. That's why, as I'm speaking to you, we've launched an inter-parliamentary alliance on China, which has more than 300 parliamentarians from over 30 countries. What is needed now really is a concerted collective response. And we hope that the governments of these countries will also be part of an alliance. So you would have a governmental alliance, you will have a parliamentary alliance, you will have people collectively defending the rules-based international order. And so no country will have to stand alone, and we can try to bring about accountability with regard to China, not only re-Hong Kong, but with its massive repressions, whether it be with regard to the Uyghurs, whether it be with regard to China now jailing more journalists than any other country in the world, whether it be its repression of Hong Kong, its threats to Taiwan, repression of Tibet. There is really a major justice agenda and human rights agenda that we have to collectively engage in.
Are the 300,000 Canadians that live in Hong Kong in jeopardy in your mind?
Well, the 300,000 could be at risk if, in fact, China not only imposes national security legislation, continues its criminalization of other matters as it's done now with regard to the national anthem, but begins to inject mainland security forces into Hong Kong itself. You remember there were massive demonstrations to protest the extradition bill so that people could not be extradited from Hong Kong to mainland China. Well, China has now turned it around. It has injected itself into Hong Kong. So this can bring about not only the criminalization of fundamental freedoms, but waves of arrests and the like. And as I said, suppression of the democracy movement itself. So the 300,000 could be caught up.
A critical moment, 31 years after the Tiananmen Square massacre on this day in 1989. Irwin Cotler, I always appreciate hearing your powerful words on this. Thank you, sir, for your perspective. We got to keep a very close eye